Dead silence.
One over here. Thanks, Annie.
I think just for the general ethos of the day, I think you need to pick one another up. You need to say how great we all each are as women, as midwives. I mean, fantastic for organising this conference. It's absolutely brilliant. Passing that message on so we can all go out here feeling positive and stronger and yes, we've done something and something better about ourselves, so we can go and take that forward as the momentum to then take other things forward. Yes.
One thing I'm hearing around in the field, I think, is that if student midwives are in the community and learning about caseload, doing caseloading kind of work, community work, then you're kind of growing team caseloading team workers, and so I think it starts young. That's what I'm saying. So I think more students actually should be getting out in the community. That's what I'm hearing.
Needs 2 minutes, yes.
Right, anybody else?
Hello, my name is Kay. I'm an independent midwife, so continuity is very much within my work. I've worked for this for years. I think one of the things I remember when I became an independent midwife was that they're very fearful about change generally. I think that we need to embrace continuity wholeheartedly and make it happen. I think we need to stop being fearful and putting up barriers and just learning how to work in different ways.
Anybody else ready? I'll just make a contribution. One of the things I've been working on for the last 12, 18 months is doing my bit as a volunteer to revitalise the network of maternity services liaison committees or maternity forums. Thank you very much. And it's amazing what you can do by networking. And now we have got so much great social media, we don't need to work in isolated ways anymore. And it's so uplifting when you hear about all the positive things that people are doing. And I would say to you, whether you're a midwife or a service user advocate, make the MSRC if there isn't one, see about getting one set up, and you might need to start with a local social media page to engage local women. You can do it, there's some wonderfully successful ones out there, and there is a Facebook group called MSLC Leaders, and anybody who is interested, whether they're health professionals or service user representatives, are very welcome to join that group and find out about the positive things that are going on around the place. And very often you've got service users who are calling for change. That can be a really powerful thing. But they also need the support of midwives, doctors, commissioners. Networking is the key. Are we ready to go? I don't know why we've got that funny buzz, but so this is the feedback. Do you want to introduce it?
Yes. So what we asked is for feedback from each workshop. This is not a cut video. You've got my voice in it and a few things. So just bear with us on that one. And just a couple of minutes feedback per workshop. Is that what will work?
That both of our workshops focused on. We found many examples of community models around the country. And that included the barriers that they've come across and how they've overcome them. So the two real themes were the implementation of teams, so getting CCGs on board, having a passionate manager, considering midwives pay, for example, a lot of the models that are successful have band 7 midwives working within them. Thinking about inclusion criteria and recruitment processes. And then the other thing was sustainability, so midwives being protected and being called into business units, the ability to pilot, audit and audit outcomes of the teams. Case sharing tips about how they manage the work, like they manage their work-life balance, and then there was a lot of discussion around team dynamics and the support that we both give each other. And then a few other things that came up was the reasons that teams have disbanded, which included being called into busy units, caseload being too big, midwife being on calls. People also spoke about future research opportunities and the wider role of midwife in terms of continuation of this.
It's recording, so just start whenever you're ready.
So, together as a team, we've just presented a workshop for Women's Voices, where we just really gave a platform for these women here to speak about their personal experiences, personal work experiences, their experiences of continuity or lack of continuity, the difference that I'm making to them. So, do you want to just each say a little bit about what you
Yeah, I'm Lauren, I'm a birth doula and a hypnobirth teacher, and I'm a mother of 4. And my first 3 births, I kind of felt that continuity care was completely lacking. So with my 4th, I made sure that it was there by using a doula and home birth and kind of escaping the system altogether, and it completely changed how I view birth. So direct comparison, you know, I can see the importance of it completely.
I'm Kathy and I run a home birth support network in the Greater Manchester where I live. And I ended up free birthing my 2 daughters because I just couldn't contemplate a stranger turning up in labour. And I would have liked to have continuity, but it wasn't an option for me. It was better to birth alone than have someone turn up who I just couldn't get on with or my life with and stop my head from happening.
And I had 2 previous traumatic cesareans, and then I went on to have a natural birth. And during that pregnancy, up to 36 weeks, I hadn't seen the same person once, and there was lots of personal views and experiences brought to my table that influenced the choices that they was making about my birth. At 37 weeks, I was allocated a midwife to support my choices, that was going to advocate for me, and she just believed in me, she never doubted me, she just gave me as much information as she could to make informed decisions about my birth, and it was just so empowering. And I went on and I had the birth I wanted. And I just think that whilst a lot of women receive fantastic physical care, continuity offers a care that meets their physical and their emotional needs, and that is a gold standard of care that every woman deserves, and that is what we should all unite and really push for.
So our workshop explored TEAL as an organisational model for caseloading and midwifery, and I think the small group work at the end generally was very positive about the aspects of TEAL, which are self-management, the support, the wholeness, and felt that it could offer a really good structure for new organisations and new models and new caseloading models up and coming. I think some of the midwives voiced concerns that they didn't feel fully equipped and would need to build their confidence in terms of self-management, how to work with their own caseload, and also how to how to fit real life around their work. A few other issues came up which weren't related to TEAL, but were worth mentioning. Ensuring that all models of caseloading are inclusive, so for all women across the board, and also that they're flexible enough to allow midwives in different situations, different times of their career to caseload as well. There were concerns about, as often there are, about caseloads becoming too large and how financial constraints could really jeopardise any caseloading models. There were a couple of points about, because TEAL organisations have the potential to look maybe a little less structured than traditional NHS organisations. It's how the governance structure plays out within such an organisation, and we were able to talk a little bit about that. Generally there was some good discussion. I think midwives were really interested to know how it worked, which is obviously an ongoing discussion. And thank you to everyone for participating.
Really interesting interactive workshop. I think one of the big messages is that, particularly for midwives at the front line, they're kind of like, well, what is commissioning? How does it work? You know, what do you need? What qualifications do you need to have to be a maternity commissioner? Which is really a very insightful and interesting question to ask. There's something about making sure that the commissioners that we have actually have walked in the shoes of women and those who are providing the service, you know, doing shadowing type work with commissioners so that they can really understand the everyday experience. There was definitely a really strong resonance with the fact that we need to measure outcomes around staff well-being as well as patient women, family experience and outcome measures. So that was seemed to be quite a strong message from people. And I think probably the third thing that was a really kind of like light bulb moment, certainly from my point of view, and I think it resonated really strongly with the room, was that actually at the moment we're kind of measuring lots of away from outcomes like caesarean rate and punishing people for not achieving targets around that instead of rewarding people for healthy, for normal births. So, there's something about turning all these negatives into a positive and focusing on what we want to happen and not what we don't want to happen.
Right, this is the feedback from the education workshop. We started by looking at the ARN vision and then went on to identify the problems we were going to deal with, of which a big one was the gap between the ideology within which midwives are educated and the disillusionment they hit when they're in clinical practice. There was much talk of working problems for management, which include moving midwives around to plug the gaps in the service and the pressure to tick increasing numbers of boxes, which leads to a situation where midwives just can't make eye contact with women. The workshop members had a tremendous resources between them. There were lots of people now providing continuity of care and a great deal of eagerness to help others to learn and not to limitations. So the answers we came up with in terms of education for students, it was felt to be all important that students learn from those who are doing continuity of care, placements in the NHS and with independent midwives, and if that is not possible, then attaching students to individual women, which is now required for midwifery education in Australia. In some places, teachers can carry caseloads, as happens in New Zealand, and we would very much welcome a path into midwifery education for women with experience who've been support workers or have been otherwise involved as peer supporters or breastfeeding supporters. There was a need for students to be able to actually practice in the community, and this was felt to be very limited. And as a profession, a need for us to control our own education and our own registration. In terms of clinical midwives, there was identified a great need to provide better pastoral care, including widespread use of the potential of social media, and there was a long discussion about care for the carers. We learned a lot from independent midwives in terms of support, collaboration and networking, and we heard of one university in Australia which is now running an MSc programme in continuity of care. The last area which was seen as very important was professional development of our leaders. A great deal of steam was let off in terms of the shortcomings of the NMC, not crucifying our leaders, and our leaders' situation not being understood by clinical midwives. And if you harness that steam, you could remove mountains. There was identified to be a real need for midwives on trust boards, and midwifery not just being represented via their nursing. A need for support and understanding of what senior management do, and a need to analyse and bridge the gap between the midwifery ideology and the economic imperatives which run trusts. There was thought to be a crying need for a government minister for babies and to achieving continuity of care and sustainable models of that care.
The general discussion.
Well, thank you. That was a really lively way to get the feedback. And of course, because it's all being recorded, it can be used and made available to people who aren't here today. Now, we asked our workshop leaders to come to the front, really just so they get a crick in their neck. See themselves, warts and all, up close and personal. Having very kindly come to the front, I'm now going to invite you to go back. Because we're going to move on to David Richmond, President of the Royal College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, who we are delighted is with us here today to give an obstetrician's input. So over to you, David, and thank you for waiting.
Thank you, Mary. Just while we're getting the technology sorted. I've known Mary and Leslie for quite a long time. Maybe not as long as many of you in the audience, but I didn't really know Annie until I met her on the maternity review, which Julia chaired. And I'll keep talking for a second. And she's very persuasive as well as I was minding my own business, and she said, "What are you doing on the 12th or whatever date it is today?" And I couldn't really think quick enough. She said, "What do you know about continuity?" And I said, "Well, of course I know a lot, but not in the midwifery context." And listening to those feedbacks on the videos, there was a phenomenal amount of resonance between the world that you've been talking about today and the world that I work in, which is obviously medics. And as president of the college, I spent all morning, which is why I wasn't here, talking about the junior doctor's strike. And some of the issues that underpin that, about resource, about stress, about busyness, about our, that's just the same world that you live in. And we have a problem. And whether Julia's minister or not, it's at that end that we will need to talk about in the fullness of time, about the sustainability of the NHS, the resource that we have to look after all our patients, mums and babies. Have we got enough? The answer probably is no. There's some lovely stuff if you can be bothered going on to the OECD website looking at how we fare with our European neighbours. The amount of money that we spend from our gross domestic product on healthcare. And how many medics or how many midwives or how many nurses or how many MRI scanners we've got to serve our population. It's staggering. Absolutely staggering. If we had the same amount of money just as a quickie as Germany does, we would have another 50 billion to look after the patients that we serve. Anyway, you're not here to listen to me talk politics, so what I want us to do is talk about why I'm here. Continuity. Well, it's dear to my heart. And we have a major problem, not only in obstetrics, but in gynecology, in general medicine, in general surgery. And I'm not entirely sure what has happened or what has gone wrong. I don't think it's all to do with the busyness. I don't think it's all to do with the European Working Time Directive. There are more midwives in the system, there are more doctors in the system. But when I trained, a long, long time ago, I think the first baby I delivered was 39 years, nearly 40 years ago. And I was at the Simpson in Edinburgh. So I was there for a long time, doing my undergraduate and then early postgraduate career before I went down to Liverpool. And in those days, the obstetrics that I learned was through Maggie Miles' textbook of midwifery. And I can remember to this day, because I've got a tattoo, but I'm not going to show you, but I've got a tattoo, which we used to do 100 and odd hours over the weekend. So you'd start on a Saturday morning and you'd finish on a Tuesday night at 5. And that was whatever many hours, 80 hours straight. So you built up a huge camaraderie, not only with your junior doctors, but with your midwifery and your midwife friends in college. Because you were your child, because I didn't have a social life. My social life was the hospital. And you would go and have lunch, you'd go and have dinner, you'd go and have a beer, you'd go and have a party. And that relationship, I think, has faltered over the last 20 or 30 years. Molly Staples was the senior midwife, and one or two of you may remember Molly. She was the big boss of the labour ward, and she was a big woman. And she would sit there at the desk like this. And she'd see me coming down the corridor, and she would say, David, I think the woman in room 4 needs a drip. Or, I think we need to get the Keelans and the lady in room 5. Or, I think we should cross-match the woman in room 3. And this would be, 8 o'clock in the morning. And she had gone round everybody, she'd done rectal examination, and she had assessed what the need was for these women. And she was 99% right. And so most of the obstetricians of my generation learned the majority of their obstetric practice, certainly of normality, from their midwifery chums and their midwifery colleagues. And I look back on Molly and the Miles textbook of midwifery with great fondness. And these were the Nightingale wards that we went round. The sharp-eyed of you will realise that there's not a cot there, because this is not a maternity ward. This is an example of the Royal Infirmary in the 1970s. And what we used to do is we used to go to the labour ward first and sort out the ladies who were there with our midwifery friend. And then we went to the postnatal ward. Now the postnatal ward doesn't really exist anymore. But mums who'd had Caesars would be there for at least a week. Mums who had normal deliveries or instrumentals would be there for 3 or 4 days. You got to know them. And the babies were beside them because they were in the cots. And we would do a postnatal ward round as a nice thing to do, but also as a learning exercise. And we would be able to sort out some of the potential traumas that had happened. And if she didn't have a cot beside her bed, you knew that the baby was probably in special care. So your approach to her would be slightly different from the woman who was lying in bed next door. And that continuity, where there was then the midwife and the doctor, the junior doctor, discharging the patient and handing her over to, it wasn't a health visitor then, I can't remember what it would be, but it would certainly be the GP. Those days are gone. Those days are gone. So we've lost that continuity from a medical point of view, and we've lost that from a midwifery point of view. I've just got a few slides, because the focus I wanted to do was to talk about medicine and talk about obstetrician, because this is the group of doctors that I am responsible for. Nothing like the number of midwives. If we just focus on England, we've got more or less 2,000 consultants and we've got 1,500 trainees. We've got an interesting less than full-time working cohort, which you'll see down at the bottom. I'm not going to go into great detail. But about 20% of my trainees don't want to work full-time. They work less than full-time. And 82% are women. 82% of the obstetricians are now women. 50% of consultants are female, 82% of the trainees will be women. So in, I think, 20 years, there won't be a male obstetrician for love nor money. Some of you may be screaming out for a male, but maybe you won't. Maybe you'll be screaming out for a male president again. Maybe, I don't know. Maybe that's not likely to happen. But we also have a shed load of other doctors in the system, which are not part of the junior doctors' problem at the moment. They're not part of the striking. But these are the solution, if you like, the trusts have adopted in order to facilitate service provision. So we've got junior doctors at the top end, GPs, post-CCD doctors who are finished but haven't got a consultant's job yet, the trust doctors, the trust fellows. These are cheating ways, if you like, of hospitals being able to fulfill the rotas and satisfy the demands. When we look at the number of maternity units, it's actually quite hard to identify precisely how many there are in the country. Obviously, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland are easier to absolutely clarify the numbers, but in England, I have to say, I find that quite challenging. But if you put the equation of the medical staff together with the number of hospitals that we're there to try and provide cover for, we have a significant problem. So at any one time, in my world, we have what's called a rota gap, so I can't provide the number of registrars or senior registrars in these units. And there's a 25% gap at any one time. Quite often on Friday night at 5 o'clock, so-and-so phones in sick or whatever it is, and you have to try and find a locum. Locums, I suspect locum midwives are just as hard as locum doctors. They are very hard to find. So I was interviewed and wrote an article which was then picked up by Dennis Campbell. Many of you will know Dennis Campbell from The Guardian. There was a little bit of poetic license from the editor, and I was accused of calling for a string of maternity unit closures. Because I said, in my view, that we either continue to provide an unsafe service, or we reconfigure and rationalise what we do, and you have medics in a smaller number of units. What they didn't include in the article was the option of actually giving us more resources and providing the requisite amount of money, the requisite amount of doctors, more medical school places, greater output to satisfy the demand that we need. But the final paragraph was this, which I firmly believe in, and it's something we talked about in the maternity review, in that there is by far the majority of women in this country deliver in obstetric units with or without alongside midwifery units. And the evidence is such, which I'm quite happy to accept, that if we get it right at the beginning, there's absolutely no reason whatsoever where a mum who has no medical complications that she needs to come and see me can't deliver wherever she likes. You might argue whether it should be all primates, all multips, or a mixture of both. That's a debate and an argument for another time. But there's no doubt that there is evidence out there to support out of hospital, out of obstetric unit. Okay. And I would entirely support that. But it's then that linkage between the midwifery team, you, out in the community, midwives in the hospital, and the doctors in the hospital, building up that rapport, building up that relationship so that you can actually pick up the phone on first name terms, I've got a problem or whatever. And that continuity, to me, is absolutely crucial. One of the ladies, I think, who was on the debriefing there, talked about outcomes. And I make no apology for this, but this has just come out in the last week or two. And I wanted to share it with you, and I don't want you to look at the detail, because you probably can't see it. Can the lights go down a little? That's how you do that. But this is, what we did was we pulled hospitals' information on a range of indicators. Now, you won't necessarily like the indicators, but to be honest, sometimes it's quite hard to get them. So to get patient-reported outcome is actually really hard. So we rely very heavily on what the hospitals send back to the National Collecting Agency, which is called Hospital Episode Statistics. And by analysing that, you can look at what's happening in every single hospital in the country. And you can go onto the website here and see what's happening in your unit and compare it with another unit. But if you look at the two right-hand columns, this is the bottom 10% and the top 10% of the units in England. And what's staggering is that every single one of those 18 indicators varies by at least twofold. And this isn't because there are more deprived women, or more obese women, or more Paris women, or more complicated women, because the technology and the people that have done that have cleaned all that out. So this is comparing a woman in Birmingham with Plymouth, with Gravesend, with Newcastle, with Liverpool. It's exactly the same cohort. So it's what we are doing as doctors and midwives that is influencing these outcomes. And in my view, that is completely unacceptable. That level of variation should not be allowed. And I would completely support you that what we want to be doing is to driving the majority of pregnancy to the normal end of the spectrum. Of course we do. Nobody wants to have an intervention unless it's necessary. And there are interventions that are going on in these 150 odd units. It's all on the website, so you don't need to take pictures, but you can get it freely available. And I find that staggering. And what we need to do is we need to understand the variation and the reasons behind the variation, whether it's staffing, whether it's continuity of care, because undoubtedly both of those will have some reference and relevance to those figures. Then we need to go and understand what are the guidelines? How do we make it better? How do we achieve the sorts of outcomes that are occurring in the best 5 or 10%? So that's just indicators. And then finally, the last three slides, are that the continuity isn't just about the pregnancy per se. It can't be. It's got to be about what I would call a life course of a woman, from pre-pregnancy and in the context of what we're talking about. So that if we get the woman as fit as we possibly can, with help from our nursing and GP colleagues, fit for pregnancy. And then we look at what's going on in pregnancy so that there's then a handover back into primary care, to health visitors for the baby, to GPs for the mum. We've got